After finalizing my brutal divorce, I leased a remote mountain sanctuary to rebuild my peace. First night, Mom texted, "We're hosting the summer reunion there tomorrow. I don't care about your privacy." She even added, "Your brother's friends are coming too. Don't like it? Hide." I didn't argue. When they arrived, they froze at what blocked the road. The ink on my divorce decree was barely a week old, and the paper still felt heavy with the 14 months of absolute hell it took to get a judge to sign it. I had spent $22,000 fighting a man who hid assets and weaponized every piece of our shared life. Winning my freedom meant emptying my savings. The 6-month lease on the Blue Ridge cabin was my only indulgence, a desperate attempt to find a place where the air didn't feel thick with arguments and court dates. My mother's text arrived at 10:42 p.m. I was sitting on the back deck, wrapped in a fleece blanket, listening to the wind move through the pines. My phone buzzed on the cedar table. I didn't want to look, but the old anxiety flared up, the trained reflex that ignoring her only made the eventual explosion worse. I read the words glowing on the screen. She had looped in my older brother Derek. She wasn't asking. She was commandeering. I didn't reply. I didn't try to reason with her or beg her to respect my space. Instead, I pulled up the browser on my phone and searched for the local towing dispatch that serviced the mountain roads. I knew the drill. I had used a similar service months ago when my ex refused to move his junk cars from my driveway out of pure spite. I called the local dispatcher at 11:15 p.m. He answered on the second ring, a gravelly voice over the sound of a dispatch radio. I gave him the property address, confirmed the easement laws for the private fire lane leading to my gate, and mapped out exactly what I needed. I didn't sleep much that night. I just watched the shadows of the trees stretch across the hardwood floor. By noon the next day, the gravel at the bottom of the canyon started to pop and crunch under heavy tires. I stood on my upper deck, a mug of black coffee going cold in my hands. Through the tree line, I saw the blinding white roof of a chartered party bus groaning up the steep, narrow incline. Right behind it was a black transit van with a local Beebit Caterers logo slapped on the side. My mother had squeezed the lower community gate code out of my Aunt Sylvie. She marched right up to my secondary private gate, the one separating my leased acreage from the rest of the mountain, and punched the digits into the keypad with extreme confidence. The keypad buzzed a harsh, flat red. She slammed her palm against the buttons 3 more times, jabbing the asterisk key like it was a personal enemy. "Nadia," her voice crackled through the intercom speaker in my kitchen, dropping into that sharp, humiliating register she always used in public to bring me to heel. "Open this gate instantly." I pressed the talk button. "You're trespassing on a private lease." I could hear her scoff through the static. Down at the gate, Derek hopped off the bus. He was wearing mirrored sunglasses and holding a half-empty hard seltzer. "Mom said you wanted company. We already paid the caterer, Nadia. We put down a $3,000 deposit." That was the moment the sheer audacity of her scheme clicked into focus. My mother hadn't just decided to drop by to check on my mental health. She had promised Derek a free luxury venue for his 30th birthday weekend. She had told his friends there would be unlimited access to my hot tub and fire pit. She had hijacked my hard-won sanctuary to play the generous, wealthy hostess, and she had orchestrated the entire disaster before the ink on my lease was even dry. She was using my tragedy as a free event space. I walked down the long gravel driveway. The mountain air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust from the idling bus. I stopped a few feet from the heavy iron gate and kept my hands in my pockets. "You cannot host an event here," I said. "I didn't authorize a reunion. I didn't authorize a party." My mother shoved her expensive sunglasses onto the top of her head. "Stop being so intensely selfish. You just went through a divorce. You've been moping for a year. You need people around you." "I need silence," I said. "You need to turn around." Derek kicked the iron grating, his heavy boots rattling the metal. Behind him, the catering driver honked his horn. The van was stuck behind the bus, unable to back down the narrow, winding incline without a spotter. I stood my ground on the gravel. "Get off this easement," I said. "I'm telling you once." My mother smirked. It was the same look my ex gave me during mediation when he thought he had me cornered. "Or what, Nadia? You'll have your own family arrested? You're going to call the cops on your brother?" "No," I said. I hit a button on the small remote in my pocket to ensure the gate's deadbolt stayed locked. "I'll have you towed." While we stood there in a tense, vibrating silence, the whine of heavy machinery echoed up the canyon. 2 heavy-duty flatbed wreckers from the local dispatch appeared around the bend, their yellow strobe lights flashing violently against the green pines. My mother's smirk vanished. She turned around as the lead driver put his rig into park, the air brakes hissing loudly. She immediately walked toward him, pasting on a strained, desperate smile. "Sir, there's a huge misunderstanding here. My daughter is going through a terrible divorce, and she's just acting out. We're here for a private family gathering." The driver ignored her outstretched hand. He looked through the iron bars at me. "Ma'am, are you the leaseholder at this address?" "I am." "Did you authorize commercial vehicles to block this designated fire lane?" "I did not." He turned to my mother, pulling a thick metal clipboard from his high-vis vest. "Ma'am, you are blocking a mandatory emergency access road. You have exactly 5 minutes to reverse that bus out of here, or I'm hooking it up. It's a $500 impound fee to get it off the lot, plus mileage." My mother stared at his scuffed boots, then whipped her head back to me. "She's practically having a nervous breakdown," she hissed at the driver, desperate to maintain her narrative of control. "She doesn't know what she's doing." "Yes, ma'am," the driver said, flatly. "She's also the one who called me an hour ago to put me on standby." Derek started swearing loudly, throwing his seltzer can into the ditch. The doors to the party bus hissed open, and Derek's new girlfriend, Amber, stomped out. She glared at Derek, then at the dirt on her white wedges. The faces in the windows of the bus looked incredibly annoyed. I almost felt a pang of guilt until I remembered my mother had weaponized these people to bulldoze my boundaries. Dangling a a free mountain getaway just to force my hand. My mother backed away from the tow truck, her face burning a deep, blotchy red. She walked up to the gate and gripped the iron bars. "You will pay for this," she spat, her voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. I watched her march back to the bus. I watched the catering van execute a dangerous, precarious turn on the gravel edge, the driver cursing out his window. The party bus slowly reversed down the mountain, guided by the tow truck drivers. I stood breathing in the sharp scent of pine and said absolutely nothing. When the road was clear, I went back inside and turned off the intercom receiver. That evening, my phone buzzed with an automated legal alert. It was a service I had set up during my divorce to monitor court filings in my name. My mother hadn't waited a single day. She had filed a fast-track civil claim in the county where I used to live, demanding I reimburse her $8,500 for a breach of verbal event contract. I opened the attached PDF. She had itemized everything: the catering deposit, the party bus rental, emotional distress, a cancellation fee for a DJ I hadn't even seen. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I called my divorce attorney, Marin. Marin was expensive, ruthless, and the only reason I wasn't currently living in my car. When I explained the civil suit, Marin let out a long, heavy sigh that crackled over the phone line. "Nadia," Marin said, "you just closed a 14-month bloodbath. You don't have the capital to fight a frivolous civil suit. We can file a motion to dismiss, but my retainer for a new civil matter is $3,000. Can you swing that right now?" I opened my banking app while holding the phone to my ear. My checking account sat at $4,120. If I paid Marin, I wouldn't make rent on the cabin next month. "I can't," I said, the reality of the math pressing into my chest. "If I give you $3,000, I default on this lease. Then you have to go to the preliminary hearing and defend yourself," Marin said, her tone softening just a fraction. "They have no proof of a verbal contract, but your mother knows she's bleeding you dry. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's banking on you folding and paying the $8,000 just to make her go away." I thanked Marin and hung up. Before I could even process the financial trap my mother had laid, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, local to the mountain area. I answered cautiously. "Nadia, this is Soren Fairfax. I manage the properties for this ridge." His voice was tight, professional, but deeply strained. "I received a very concerning phone call this morning from a woman claiming to be your mother." My stomach dropped. "Mr. Fairfax, I can explain. She told the HOA board that you are running an illegal commercial towing racket off the private easement," Soren interrupted. "She claimed you lured a caterer up there, trapped them, and tried to extort them with a tow company getting a kickback. The board is threatening to break your lease under the nuisance clause. I need to come up there." Now, 30 minutes later, Soren Fairfax was standing in my kitchen. He was in his 50s, wearing a heavy canvas jacket and looking at me like I was a liability. I made him a cup of coffee and calmly explained exactly what had happened. I showed him the text from my mother. I showed him the call log to the tow dispatch. I didn't cry, and I didn't raise my voice. I treated it exactly like I treated the depositions with my ex-husband. Facts, dates, times. Soren looked at the text message on my phone for a long time. He took a sip of his coffee. "She told the board you were having a psychotic break," he said quietly. "She tells everyone that," I replied. "It makes it easier for her to explain why I don't speak to her. The board wants you out, Nadia. They don't like drama. These properties rent for a premium because they are quiet." Soren set the mug down. "I'll talk them down. I will show them this text. But if she pulls another stunt on this mountain, my hands are tied. You'll have 3 days to vacate." I spent the next 48 hours compiling evidence for my own defense. Without Marin, I had to draft my own response to the civil claim. I logged into the county court portal to pull the full docket my mother had submitted. When I opened the exhibits folder attached to her filing, my blood went cold. Exhibit A wasn't a list of receipts. It was a printed screenshot of an email. The email was sent from my old primary Gmail address. It was addressed to my mother. The subject line read, "Cabin weekend." The body of the text was brief. "Mom, yes, you can definitely use the cabin for Derek's 30th. I could use the company anyway. Just let me know when the caterer gets there so I can leave the gate open." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I had never written that email. I looked at the timestamp. Tuesday, April 14th at 10:15 a.m. On Tuesday, April 14th at 10:15 a.m., I was sitting in a windowless mediation room at the county courthouse, strictly forbidden from having my phone or laptop on. My mother had logged into my old shared family iMac, a computer I had left at her house 3 years ago, accessed my email, and sent a fabricated message to herself to create a legally binding paper trail of consent. She had committed fraud. I printed the document, my hands shaking. I knew I had to subpoena Apple or Google for the IP address logs, but I had no idea how to do that without a lawyer, and I didn't have the $3,000 to hire Marin to do it for me. I was staring at a wall of expensive legal procedures designed to crush people exactly like me. A sharp knock at the heavy oak front door made me flinch. I walked to the foyer and checked the security monitor. Standing on my porch in the pouring mountain rain, holding a massive black umbrella, was Amber, Derek's girlfriend. She looked up at the camera lens, her makeup running slightly. She didn't press the bell again. She just stood there, waiting. I unbolted the door and opened it a few inches. The damp, freezing air rushed into the warm cabin. "How did you get past the lower gate?" I asked. "Your mom didn't change the code she got from your aunt," Amber said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the bubbly energy she had displayed on the party bus. "Can I come in?" "No." Amber closed her umbrella and stood on the covered porch, shivering slightly in her thin trench coat. "Derek and your mom don't know I'm here. They think I'm at work." "I don't care where they think you are, Amber. You need to leave before I call the sheriff." "Your mom didn't pay for the caterer, Nadia," Amber said quickly, her eyes darting to my face. "She didn't pay for the bus, either. She put it all on Derek's credit card. She told him he could charge charge his friends a cover fee for a luxury weekend at your place to pay it off. When you told us, Derek defaulted. He's broke. Your mom is suing you because they literally owe the vendors $8,000 and the bus company is threatening to take Derek to small claims. I gripped the edge of the door. Why are you telling me this? Amber reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope because I saw her send the email. I was in the kitchen at her house. She bragged about it to Derek. She said you were too stupid to change your old passwords. Amber held the envelope tightly against her chest. I have a recording of her saying it. I recorded it on my phone because I knew she was going to try to blame the failed party on me. I stared at the envelope. Give it to me. I will, Amber said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But Derek wiped out our joint savings to pay the deposit on that bus. My rent is due in 4 days. You give me $2,000 cash right now, and this recording is yours. If you don't, I swear to God, Nadia, I will sit in that courtroom and testify that I watched you write that email yourself. I stared at her. Just stared. The sheer, ugly desperation in her eyes was something I recognized instantly. It was the same look my ex-husband had during our final mediation session, when he realized the judge wasn't going to let him keep my retirement account. It was the look of someone backed into a corner, ready to do whatever it took to survive. Morality be damned. You want to extort me? I said, my voice dead calm. Amber didn't blink. I want my rent money. Your family dragged me into this mess. Derek promised me a luxury vacation, and instead I'm dodging calls from our landlord while he screams at his mother on the phone. I'm not going down for this. I looked at the manila envelope. There's no cash in this cabin. The closest ATM is 20 miles down the mountain, and it has a $500 daily limit. Even if I wanted to pay you, I couldn't do it today. Then write me a check. A check leaves a paper trail, I said. If I write you a check for $2,000 and you hand over evidence for a civil suit, that's witness tampering. My mother's lawyer would subpoena my bank records, see the transfer to you, and the recording would be thrown out as a paid for fabrication. You'd go down for extortion and perjury. Amber's jaw tightened. She gripped the handle of her umbrella so hard her knuckles turned white. She wasn't stupid, but she was panicked. Play it for me, I said. Right now. Let me hear it, or you can turn around and walk back down that driveway. She hesitated. The wind whipped rain across the porch, soaking the hem of her coat. She shoved the envelope back into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb shook slightly as she unlocked the screen and navigated to her voice memos. She tapped a file labeled April 14. She held the phone out, her finger hovering over the speaker. Just 10 seconds, she said. She pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled, like the phone had been sitting face down on a kitchen counter, but the acoustics were unmistakably my mother's cavernous, granite-lined kitchen. I could hear the clink of silverware. Then, my mother's voice, sharp and self-satisfied. Doesn't matter. Nadia's completely checked out right now anyway. She hasn't changed that old Mac password since college. I just sent the confirmation from her account. It's in writing. If she throws a fit, I have proof she agreed. Then Derek's voice, a little distant. You sure that's legal, Mom? My mother laughed. It was a cold, dismissive sound. Who's going to check? It's her email address. Besides, she owes us this. After the embarrassment she put this family through with the divorce, the least she can do is let you use that stupid cabin. Amber stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain hitting the roof. I felt a slow, dark heat spreading through my chest. Hearing it confirmed was entirely different from suspecting it. My mother hadn't just forged my consent. She had done it out of pure spite, viewing my trauma as a social inconvenience that she was entitled to be compensated for. 2,000, Amber repeated, slipping the phone back into her pocket. And I'll text you the file right now. No, I said. Amber's face dropped. Are you kidding me? I just told you I said no to the 2,000. I don't have it. I opened the door a little wider. Come inside. She looked at me suspiciously but stepped out of the rain. She dripped water onto the hardwood floor of the foyer. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I have $4,000 to my name, I told her, leaning against the wall. Total. If I give you half of it, I default on my lease, the hoe kicks me out, and my mother wins anyway because I won't have a place to live or the money to fight her. You're squeezing the wrong person, Amber. I don't have a choice. She snapped, her voice cracking. Derek's account is overdrawn by $3,000. The party bus company charged his card the full penalty for the cancellation and the tow. He doesn't have it. My name is on our lease. If we get evicted, my credit is destroyed. Then let's destroy Derek's instead. Amber stopped wiping the rain from her face. She looked up at me. What? Derek and my mother did this, I said quietly. Derek stood in that kitchen and listened to her commit wire fraud, and he went along with it because he wanted a free party. Now he's dragging you down with him. I crossed my arms. You don't need $2,000 from me. You need leverage over Derek, and I need this lawsuit to go away. I walked into the kitchen and pulled out one of the heavy cedar bar stools. I motioned for her to sit. She walked over slowly, leaving a trail of wet footprints. My lawyer wants $3,000 just to file a motion to dismiss, I explained. I can't afford that, but if I can prove to the judge that the evidence is fraudulent before the preliminary hearing, the suit gets thrown out. I don't just need that recording, Amber. I need an affidavit. I need you to sign a sworn statement saying you witnessed my mother accessing my account and fabricating that email. I'm not signing a legal document, Amber said, shaking her head. Your mom will murder me. She'll ruin me. She's already ruining you, I pointed out. She saddled your boyfriend with $8,000 in debt and she's trying to make me pay for it. If you sign the affidavit, I can take it directly to the county clerk. I submit it as an exhibit in my defense. When my mother's lawyer sees it, he'll drop her as a client immediately. No attorney is going to risk disbarment by presenting knowingly forged evidence. And how does that help me pay my rent? Because once the civil suit is dropped, I am going to countersue my mother for legal fees and harassment, I said, the plan forming in my head like cold steel. And part of my settlement demand will be that she assumes the debt Derek incurred for the party bus. I'll make sure she pays off the vendors to keep me from reporting her to the police for identity theft. Amber stared at the granite countertop. She was running the math in her head. She was a survivor, just like me, only her current anchor was dragging her straight to the bottom. She won't pay it, Amber said finally. She's stubborn. She'll call your bluff. She won't call this bluff. If I go to the police with your affidavit and that recording, it's a felony. She's a real estate broker, Amber. She has a state license. A fraud charge means she loses her livelihood. She will write a check to the party bus company tomorrow if it means keeping her license. I opened a drawer, pulled out a notepad and a pen, and slid them across the island toward her. Write down exactly what you saw. The date, the time, the exact words she used. Everything. Amber didn't touch the pen. Derek will break up with me. Derek is a broke 30-year-old who lets his mommy book his birthday parties on stolen property, I said. You're worried about losing him? She let out a dry, bitter laugh. She picked up the pen. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the cabin was the scratching of the ballpoint pen on paper and the relentless rain on the roof. I stood by the window, watching the gray mist roll through the pines. My heart was beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. For 14 months, I had been the victim. I had been the one reacting, defending, retreating, but standing in this cabin, watching Amber draft the instrument of my mother's downfall, something shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. I was clinical. Amber finished writing. She slid the notepad back to me. It was 2 pages, front and back, detailed and damning. She had even included the fact that my mother had used my old MacBook Pro, which was kept in the guest room desk. Now text me the audio file, I said. She pulled out her phone and sent it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I opened the message, downloaded the file, and immediately backed it up to 2 different cloud drives. If this backfires, Amber said, standing up and pulling her wet coat tighter around herself, I'm telling Derek you forced me into this. Tell him whatever you want, I said. Just make sure he checks his credit card statement on Monday. I walked her to the door. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out into the rain, pulling her umbrella open and hurrying toward a silver sedan parked illegally on the shoulder of the private road. I watched her taillights disappear down the mountain. I went back into the kitchen, picked up the notepad, and read through the affidavit. It was perfect. It was exactly the ammunition I needed. But I knew I couldn't just drop it in the mail and hope for the best. My mother had connections in the county court. She played golf with half the judges. If I handled this wrong, she would find a way to bury it. I picked up my phone and called Marin's office. Her paralegal answered. I need 10 minutes with Marin, I said. No retainer, just a consultation. She's booked until Tuesday, Nadia, the paralegal said sympathetically. And she was pretty clear about the retainer. Tell her I have a sworn affidavit and a recorded confession proving the plaintiff committed wire fraud to manufacture the primary exhibit, I said. Tell her if she gives me 10 minutes, I'll let her take the countersuit on contingency. And we are going after my mother's brokerage license. There was a brief pause on the line. I heard the muffled sound of a hand covering the receiver, then a quick exchange of voices. The line clicked. Nadia. Marin's sharp voice cut through the static. I have exactly 5 minutes before a deposition. What the hell did you just find? I read her the affidavit word for word. I played the audio file over the speakerphone. When it was over, Marin let out a low whistle. Well, that is incredibly stupid on her part. Can we use it? The recording is tricky, Marin said, her lawyer brain clicking into high gear. It's a 2-party consent state. Amber recorded them without their knowledge, so it might not be admissible in a civil trial. But the affidavit? The affidavit is gold. Amber is a first-hand witness to the fabrication of evidence. It doesn't matter if the recording is legally admissible in court, because we aren't going to court. What do you mean? I mean we are going to draft a demand letter, Marin said, the predatory thrill evident in her voice. We attach a copy of the affidavit. We give her lawyer a courtesy call. We inform them that if the suit is not dismissed with prejudice within 24 hours, we will be submitting the affidavit to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges, and we will be filing a formal complaint with the state real estate commission. And the debt? I asked. Derek's debt. We demand she cover it as part of a quiet settlement to avoid prosecution, Marin said. She drops the suit, pays the bus company, and signs a non-contact order. We don't even need a judge. Do it, I said. I'll have the draft in your inbox in an hour. You need to get that affidavit notarized immediately. Find a upstore or a bank. Don't let it out of your sight. I hung up the phone. I folded the notepad paper carefully, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and put it in my waterproof hiking backpack. I grabbed my keys. I locked the cabin and ran through the rain to my Jeep. The drive down the mountain was treacherous, the switchback slick with mud and fallen pine needles, but I didn't slow down. I reached the small town at the base of the ridge 20 minutes later and pulled into the parking lot of the local credit union. I walked in, dripping wet, and paid a teller $7 to stamp and seal the affidavit. When I got back to the Jeep, my phone was ringing. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. She never called. She only texted, preferring to leave a trail of passive-aggressive instructions. Calling meant she was angry. Calling meant she had lost control of a situation and needed to re-establish dominance through volume. I sat in the driver's seat, listening to the rain hammer against the windshield. I watched her name flash on the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. We need to talk. Now, Soren Fairfax just called me. You are ruining my reputation. I stared at the text. Soren Fairfax, the hoe manager. I had forgotten about Soren. He said he was going to talk to the board. He must have called my mother to verify the tow truck incident, or perhaps to warn her about trespassing. Whatever he had said, it had spooked her. Another text came through. Derek is furious. You are tearing this family apart over a stupid cabin. Call me back before I have my lawyer add emotional damages to the suit. I typed my reply slowly, making sure there were no typos. Talk to Marin. I don't speak to felons. I hit send, put the Jeep in drive, and pulled out of the parking lot. I felt lighter than I had in a year, but when I reached the private easement leading back up to my gate, my stomach lurched. Parked sideways across the narrow gravel road, completely blocking access to the keypad, was a dark gray Range Rover. I recognized the license plate immediately. It was my mother's car, and she was standing in the pouring rain, leaning against the hood, her arms crossed, waiting for me. I didn't stop the Jeep. I let it idle about 10 feet from her bumper. The rain was coming down in thick, gray sheets, washing over the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I watched my mother through the distorted glass. She was wearing a beige cashmere trench coat that was rapidly darkening with water, and her hair, usually blown out into a rigid helmet of blonde layers, was plastered to her skull. She looked pathetic. She also looked furious. I locked my doors. She marched over to my driver's side window and slapped her palm flat against the wet glass. "Roll this down," she demanded. Her voice was muffled through the heavy insulation of the door, but the entitlement was loud and clear. I cracked the window exactly 2 inches, just enough to let the damp, freezing air and the smell of wet gravel seep into the cab. "Move your car," I said. "We need to talk right now, Nadia." Water dripped from her nose and her chin. She gripped the edge of the window glass, her knuckles turning white, as if she could force it down through sheer willpower. "Soren Fairfax called my broker. Do you understand what you've done? He called the managing partner at my real estate firm and asked if I was conducting commercial business on residential HOA property. I had to sit in a meeting for an hour explaining why a property manager thinks I'm running a towing scam. I didn't tell Soren to call your boss," I said calmly. "I told Soren you lied to him about me. Whatever he chose to do with that information is between you and him. You did this on purpose. You are deliberately trying to destroy my career over a petty grudge." "A petty grudge?" I repeated, my voice dropping. "You sued me for $8,000. You dragged a caterer and a bus driver into a fraudulent contract. You hijacked my lease. It's family property," she screamed, her composure cracking entirely. The refined, wealthy matriarch mask slipped, revealing the feral, panicking woman underneath. "Derek's credit card is maxed out. Amber is threatening to leave him. He hasn't stopped throwing up since yesterday because the bus company is taking him to small claims. You need to drop this fake towing narrative and call the bus company. Tell them you authorized the event but had a last-minute emergency. Take the liability." I stared at her. I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that seemed to startle her. "You want me to take the legal liability for your party so Derek doesn't have to pay for it. You can afford it. You got half of the house equity in the divorce." "I spent $22,000 keeping Holt from taking my retirement," I said, my voice hardening at the mention of my ex-husband's name. "I don't have $8,000 to bail out your golden child. And even if I did, I'd burn it in my fire pit before I handed it to you." My mother's eyes narrowed. The rain was stinging her face, but she didn't blink. She leaned in closer to the 2-inch gap in the window. "You're acting just like you did when you ruined your marriage," she hissed. "Selfish, hysterical, unwilling to compromise." It's exactly what Holt said. My hand froze on the steering wheel. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the wipers suddenly sounded deafening. "What did you say?" A slow, vicious smile spread across her wet face. It was the smile of someone who had just found the softest spot on her opponent's neck. "I talked to Holt," she said softly, "this morning. While you were running around the mountain playing the victim, I gave your ex-husband a call. We had a very illuminating conversation about your current mental state." My stomach dropped into a cold, bottomless pit. Holt was a financial predator. He had spent the last year of our marriage hiding money in shell LLCs and crypto wallets, gaslighting me until I thought I was losing my mind. Getting him out of my life had required an airtight separation agreement that barred him from ever contacting me again. But it didn't bar him from talking to my mother. "What did you tell him?" I demanded. "I told him you're having an episode. I told him you're hallucinating threats, calling the police on your own family, and behaving erratically," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "I told him I was worried about the settlement you received, whether you were legally competent when you signed the final disclosures." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You didn't." He was very interested, Nadia, very interested indeed, especially when I mentioned that you might have undervalued that antique jewelry collection your grandmother left you when you declared your assets in mediation. She had handed him a crowbar to pry the divorce decree back open. Holt had spent the entire mediation trying to claim my grandmother's jewelry, arguing it was a marital asset because I had stored it in a safe we both paid for. Marin had fought tooth and nail to keep it entirely in my name, proving it was a pre-marital inheritance. If Holt filed a motion claiming I had deliberately committed perjury by undervaluing it during discovery, the judge could freeze my accounts pending an investigation. My mother watched the realization wash over my face. She let go of the window glass and crossed her arms, shivering in her soaked coat but looking triumphant. "He's calling his lawyer tomorrow morning," she said. "Unless, of course, I call him back and tell him I was mistaken, that you're perfectly fine, and we resolved our little family dispute. All you have to do is drop this absurd towing thing, call the bus company, and pay the invoice." She wasn't just threatening me. She had orchestrated a two-front war. She knew Marin was expensive. She knew I couldn't afford to fight her frivolous civil suit and a reopened divorce settlement at the same time. She was trying to force me into submission by threatening to bankrupt me entirely. I looked at her. I looked at the dark gray Range Rover, blocking the only road up to my cabin. I thought about the notarized affidavit sitting in my backpack on the passenger seat. I thought about Amber, shivering on my porch, handing over the audio file because she was just as trapped by this woman as I was. "Move the car," I said. "Do we have a deal?" she asked. "No." I shifted the Jeep into reverse. "Move the car, or I'm driving through it." Her triumphant smile faltered. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't damage my car. You want to find out how erratic I can be?" I locked eyes with her. "You have 10 seconds. I took my foot off the brake. The Jeep crept backward a few inches on the gravel. I revved the engine. It was a heavy, modified modified Wrangler, built for mountain trails. Her Range Rover was a pristine, leased luxury vehicle that had never seen dirt before today. My mother stepped back from the window, her eyes widening. "Nadia, stop it. 8 seconds. I am not moving this car until you agree to pay the vendor," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured, trembling finger at me. I shifted back into drive. I didn't aim for the Range Rover. Instead, I cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. There was a steep, overgrown logging offshoot that bordered the edge of the private road, dropping sharply into a drainage ditch before curving up through the dense tree line. It wasn't a road. It was a mud chute covered in wet pine needles and rotting logs. It bypassed the main gate entirely, coming out roughly 50 yards up my private driveway. I hit the gas. The Jeep lurched forward, diving off the gravel shoulder and plunging into the ditch. Mud flew up over the hood. The heavy all-terrain tires slipped for a terrifying second, the chassis groaning against the severe angle before catching traction. Branches scraped violently against the doors, screeching like fingernails on a chalkboard. I kept my foot down. The engine roared, chewing through the muck, fishtailing wildly as I forced it up the steep embankment on the other side of the gate. I caught a glimpse of my mother in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the middle of the gravel road, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock as I bulldozed my way around her blockade. The Jeep crested the embankment and slammed back down onto the gravel of my private driveway, safely on the other side of the locked iron gate. I straightened the wheel, leaving thick tracks of brown mud across the pristine stone, and drove the rest of the way up to the cabin without looking back. When I finally parked in the carport and killed the engine, the silence was overwhelming. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key out of the ignition. I sat in the dark cab, listening to the rain ping against the metal roof. I had won the standoff, but the victory tasted like ash. Holt. She had called Holt. I grabbed my backpack and ran inside. The cabin was freezing. I had turned the heat down to save money before I left, and the damp chill had seeped into the walls. I threw my bag onto the kitchen island, pulled out my phone, and immediately opened my email. Nothing from Holt. Nothing from his attorney. Yet, I walked into the living room and threw a log into the wood stove, my mind racing. If Holt filed a motion for discovery fraud, the burden of proof would be on me. I would have to pay an independent appraiser to verify the jewelry, pay Marin to file a response, and attend another grueling round of hearings. The legal fees alone would eviscerate the $4,000 I had left. I would be evicted. I would be destitute. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. The civil suit wasn't about the $8,000. The civil suit was a distraction. It was a pressure tactic designed to make me panic, while the real knife slipped in quietly through Holt. My phone vibrated on the counter. I practically lunged for it. It was a text message, but not from my mother, and not from Holt. It was from Marin. "Draft demand letter is ready. Sending to your inbox now. Call me when you read it." I opened my laptop, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The email from Marin's office was sitting at the top of my inbox. The attached PDF was 3 pages of pure, unadulterated legal violence. Marin hadn't just threatened criminal exposure. She had outlined the exact penal codes for wire fraud, identity theft, and extortion. She had drafted a meticulous timeline using Amber's affidavit, leaving zero room for interpretation. The final paragraph demanded the immediate dismissal of the civil suit with prejudice, the assumption of all vendor debts, and the signing of a permanent non-disparagement agreement. It was a masterpiece. 2 hours ago, it would have been the end of the war. But 2 hours ago, Holt wasn't in the picture. I dialed Marin's number. She answered on the first ring, sounding breathless, like she was walking rapidly down a hallway. "Did you get it?" she asked over the clatter of heels on tile. "I'm heading into a deposition in 2 minutes, but I wanted to make sure you saw it. I'm ready to email it to her attorney the second you give me the green light." "Marin, wait," I said. "Don't send it yet." She stopped walking. The background noise quieted down. "What do you mean wait? Nadia, we have her dead to rights. If I send this now, she'll drop the suit by tomorrow morning just to stop me from calling the DA. She talked to Holt," I blurted out. The words tasted like bile. "She drove up here, blocked my road, and told me she called Holt. She told him I undervalued my grandmother's jewelry during discovery. She told him I'm having a mental breakdown. She said if I don't pay the party bus vendor, she's going to testify for him in a motion to reopen the divorce settlement." A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. "Son of a bitch," Marin whispered. "If we hit her with this demand letter, she won't just fold," I said, pacing the length of the kitchen. "She's too vindictive. She'll drop the civil suit, but she'll immediately call Holt and help him freeze my accounts out of spite. She'll burn me to the ground just to prove she can. I can't afford to fight Holt again, Marin. I physically and financially cannot do it." Marin sighed, a sharp exhalation of breath. Okay, let me think. Can we add a clause about Holt to the demand letter?" "No," Marin said instantly. "We have proof of the wire fraud regarding the cabin. We have zero proof of what she said to Holt. If we put Holt in a formal demand letter, her lawyer will instantly recognize it as a weakness. They'll know we're terrified of the divorce being reopened, and they'll use it as leverage. She'll offer to stay away from Holt only if you drop the criminal threat and pay the vendors. So she outmaneuvered us." "No," Marin said, her voice hardening into that ruthless tone that had saved my life in court. "She just changed the board. We can't use the demand letter right now. We have to neutralize Holt first. Do you have the jewelry?" "Yes. It's in a safety deposit box at the credit union in town. Go get it. Tomorrow morning, first thing. Take it to a certified appraiser. I'll text you the name of a guy I use who is legally bulletproof. Get a certified document stating its current market value matches exactly what we declared in mediation. If Holt files a motion, we crush it immediately with preemptive proof, and we demand he pay your attorney fees for a frivolous filing. That appraisal is going to cost me $500 I don't have, Marin. Put it on a credit card. hard. Nadia, do whatever you have to do. Because right now, your mother is holding a gun to your head and she just handed Holt the bullets. I have to go, Marin added hurriedly. Get the appraisal. Do not talk to your mother. Do not reply to Holt if he reaches out. Go dark. The line clicked dead. I slowly lowered the phone. Outside, the rain was easing into a steady, miserable drizzle. The sky over the mountains was bruising into a deep purple twilight. I walked over to the windows facing the driveway. I expected to see the Range Rover gone, finally driven away after realizing I wasn't coming back down. Instead, I saw headlights. Through the trees, cutting through the encroaching darkness, a pair of headlights swept across the lower switchback of the private easement. They weren't moving away. They were coming up. I frowned, stepping closer to the glass. My mother couldn't get past the upper gate. I had bypassed it, but the heavy iron doors were still firmly locked. Unless she planned to ram them, she couldn't get through. I watched the lights crawl up the final incline. They hit the iron gate and stopped. I waited for the intercom to buzz. I waited for her shrill voice to demand I come back down. The intercom stayed silent. Instead, the headlights flicked off. The red glow of the taillights illuminated the wet gravel for a moment, and then the car shifted into park. I squinted through the rain-streaked window. It wasn't the dark gray shape of a Range Rover. It was a silver sedan. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out into the rain. Even from this distance, in the fading light, I recognized the slumped, defeated posture. It was Derek. He didn't walk up to the gate. He didn't press the intercom. He just walked to the edge of the gravel shoulder, near the steep drop off of the ditch, and sat down on a large boulder. He pulled his hood up over his head, resting his elbows on his knees, staring blankly at the iron bars. He looked like someone who had just lost everything. My phone buzzed on the counter. I turned away from the window and picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number. It's Amber. Derek found out I gave you the recording. He kicked me out of the apartment. He says he's coming to your cabin to make things right, but he took his dad's hunting rifle out of the closet before he left. Lock your doors, Nadia. I read the text twice. The words blurred, then sharpened, cutting through the residual adrenaline still humming in my veins. A hunting rifle. I looked back out the window. Down at the lower gate, illuminated by the red glow of his own taillights, Derek was still sitting on the boulder. His head was bowed. His shoulders shook, though whether from the freezing rain or from sobbing, I couldn't tell. He didn't look like a man preparing to storm a house. He looked like a 30-year-old child who had finally hit the bottom of his own bad decisions. I typed a response to Amber. Are you sure he has the gun? Did you see him holding it? 3 dots appeared on the screen, holding for what felt like an eternity before her reply came through. No, but the hard case is missing from the back of his closet. He was screaming about how everything is your fault. He said he was going to fix it permanently. I locked my phone and slid it into my back pocket. I walked over to the security panel mounted on the kitchen wall and tapped the screen to bring up the high-definition camera feed for the main gate. I zoomed in on Derek's silver sedan. The windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see if there was a rifle case in the passenger seat or the back. But I knew Derek. I knew him better than Amber did. Derek was a coward. He liked the aesthetics of power, the party buses, the expensive tabs, the loud bragging in front of his friends, but he crumbled the second the bill came due. If he brought our dad's old Remington, it wasn't to shoot through my deadbolts. It was a prop. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to force me to take pity on him, or worse, to threaten himself so I would fix his mess. I was not going to call the county sheriff. Calling the sheriff meant armed deputies, flashing lights, and a standoff on the Hose private road. It meant Soren Fairfax would have a police report to hand the board, and my lease would be terminated by morning. My mother would use the police record to prove to Holt that my life was spiraling out of control. It would be a catastrophic tactical error. I walked over to the intercom receiver on the counter. I pressed the talk button. Derek, my voice echoed sharply through the speaker down at the gate, cutting through the sound of the rain. On the monitor, I saw him flinch. He slowly lifted his head and looked up at the camera mounted on the stone pillar. His face was pale, his hair plastered to his forehead. He stood up, his legs clumsy and stiff from the cold, and stumbled toward the keypad. He pressed the button on his end. Nadia, he said. His voice was a wet, ragged rasp. Let me in, please. I'm freezing. You're not coming inside, I said, keeping my finger firmly on the button. Amber texted me. She told me about the closet. If you reach into that car, or if you touch the gate, I am calling dispatch and telling them there is an armed, suicidal man trespassing on my lease. Derek gripped the iron bars of the gate. He rested his forehead against the cold metal. I don't have the gun, he choked out. I pawned it. I pawned Dad's rifle 3 hours ago for $600 to try and stop the bus company from filing the suit. It wasn't even enough for a fraction of the interest Mom put on the card. I exhaled slowly, the tight, panicked knot in my chest loosening just a fraction. He didn't have a weapon. He just had his own ruin. Go home, Derek. You can't fix this here. I don't have a home, he yelled suddenly, the anger flaring up through the misery. Amber changed the locks. My bank account is frozen. The bus company manager called my boss this afternoon to verify my employment for wage garnishment, and they fired me. Nadia. They fired me for being a liability. I stared at his grainy face on the monitor. I didn't book the bus, Derek. Mom did. I know. He sobbed, the anger evaporating as quickly as it came. He sank to his knees in the wet gravel, still clinging to the bars. I know she did. I know she forged the email. I was standing right there. Then testify to that. Tell the truth, and I'll make sure the demand letter forces her to cover your debt. I can't, he whispered. The sound of the rain almost drowned him out. It's too late. What do you mean it's too late? Derek let go of the bars and slumped back onto his heels. He looked up at the camera, his eyes completely hollow. Mom called me after she talked to you at the lower gate. She was hysterical. She said you were trying to destroy her real estate license. She told me she'd wire the $8,000 to my account right then if I did exactly one thing for her. My blood ran cold. What did you do, Derek? She had Holt's lawyer on a conference call, he said, his voice numb. They drafted an emergency affidavit. I drove to a notary 20 minutes ago and signed it. I swore under penalty of perjury that I helped you move Grandma's jewelry into a private safety deposit box 3 months before you filed for divorce, specifically to hide it from asset discovery. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my fingers ached. Marin had told me to get an appraisal. An appraisal would prove the jewelry was worth exactly what I declared. But an appraisal didn't matter if Derek testified that I had deliberately hidden marital assets. It didn't matter what the jewelry was worth. The act of hiding it was fraud. The judge would instantly freeze my accounts, reopen the entire settlement, and penalize me for lying to the court. My mother hadn't just handed Holt the bullets. She had paid Derek to pull the trigger. She promised me the money. Derek cried, his voice breaking. She promised me she'd wire it as soon as the notary stamped the paper. But when I sent her the picture of the stamp, she blocked my number. She didn't send a dime. Nadia, she used me to ruin you. And she left me to drown anyway. I stood in my dark, quiet kitchen, staring at the screen. The sheer scale of my mother's cruelty was breathtaking. She had sacrificed her own son's future just to ensure my destruction. She knew Derek was desperate. She knew he was cornered, and she weaponized that panic to secure the false testimony Holt needed. You perjured yourself, I said, my voice eerily calm over the intercom. You committed a felony for $8,000 that you didn't even get. I'll take it back, Derek begged, pressing his face against the iron again. I'll call Holt's lawyer tomorrow. I'll tell him I lied. Just please, Nadia, let me in. I don't have any money for gas. I don't have anywhere to sleep. I'll do whatever you want. Just let me sleep on the couch. I looked at him. My older brother. The boy who used to cover for me when I broke a window in the garage. The man who stood in my mother's kitchen and laughed while she forged my name. The coward who just signed away my freedom to save his own skin. You can't take back a sworn affidavit, Derek, I said. If you tell Holt's lawyer you lied, Holt will have you arrested for perjury and fraud. You're trapped. Nadia, please, get off my mountain. I took my finger off the button. I reached up and flipped the power switch on the intercom box. The little green light died. The speaker went dead. I watched the monitor in silence. Derek stayed on his knees for a long time, yelling something I couldn't hear, the rain washing over him in relentless sheets. Finally, he realized the intercom was off. He dragged himself to his feet, stumbled back to his car, and got in. The headlights flared to life, casting long, harsh shadows through the pines. He reversed slowly, awkwardly, until he managed to turn the sedan around, the taillights bleeding red into the dark as he drove back down into the valley. I was alone again. I picked up my phone and dialed Marin's cell. It was late, past 8 o'clock, but I didn't care. I needed to stop the bomb from going off before Holt's lawyer filed that paperwork with the county clerk in the morning. Marin answered on the third ring. I told you to go dark, Nadia. Derek signed an affidavit for Holt, I said, skipping the greeting entirely. Mom orchestrated it on a conference call. He testified that he helped me hide the jewelry before the divorce. I heard the sound of Marin's car engine in the background, followed by the sharp squeal of brakes. She was driving. Are you absolutely sure? He just stood at my gate and confessed to it. Mom promised to pay his vendor debts in exchange, but she stiffed him the second the ink was dry. Marin let out a string of vicious curses that crackled over the Bluetooth connection. That changes everything. An appraisal isn't going to save us now. If Holt's attorney files that affidavit tomorrow morning, your accounts are frozen by noon. Every cent you have left will be locked in escrow pending a judicial review. So how do I stop it? We can't stop Holt from filing, Marin said grimly. We can only poison the well before he drinks from it. Did Derek give you a copy of the affidavit? No, he sent the only copy to Mom. Okay, listen to me very carefully. Holt's attorney is a shark, but he's not an idiot. He won't file a motion based on a witness who has a massive, glaring conflict of interest. We need to prove to Holt's lawyer that Derek was bribed, that the testimony was purchased. How? Mom didn't send the money. There's no bank transfer to prove a bribe. We don't need a bank transfer, Marin said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, calculated register. We need the audio recording Amber gave you, the one of your mother committing wire fraud. We are going to send it to Holt. Holt's a shark, Marin. If I send him a recording of my mother talking about wire fraud, he won't just see it as proof that Derek is lying. He'll see it as a way to destroy her too. He hates her almost as much as he hates me. Exactly, Marin said, her voice sharp with a newfound urgency. We don't need a judge to intervene. We just need to change the variables. If Holt thinks he can drag your mother into a criminal investigation for wire fraud and perjury, he'll drop the divorce motion in a heartbeat to protect his own interests. He doesn't want the court looking at his finances. He wants them looking at yours. We shift the light. I spent the next 6 hours sitting on my kitchen floor with the lights off, watching the rain stop and the moonlight begin to turn the mountain into a landscape of silver and black. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just listened to the file. Over and over, I heard my mother's voice. Cool, dismissive, absolutely certain of her own impunity. At 6 a.m., I drove into town. I found the appraiser Marin had recommended, a man named Whitmore, who worked out of a small, nondescript office behind the main post office. I handed over the jewelry, feeling like I was shedding a skin. When he finished, he handed me a document that was a plain, factual hammer. The value was identical to what I had listed in the discovery phase. There was no fraud. There was no hiding. I took the document to a local printer, scanned it, and then went to the public library to use their computer. I didn't send the email to Holt. I sent it to his attorney. I attached the appraisal, the affidavit from Amber, and the audio file of my mother. I kept the cover letter to 2 sentences. The attached documents prove that the affidavit my brother Derek intends to file is fraudulent and was manufactured through criminal coercion. Any attempt to present this evidence in court will result in these materials being forwarded to the district attorney and the State Bar Association. I pressed send and walked out into into the bright, blinding morning air. I didn't wait for a reply. I drove back up the mountain, pulled into the carport, and walked into the cabin. I didn't check my email for 2 days. I just sat on the deck, drank coffee, and watched the hawks circle the valley. On the third day, my phone pinged. It was an email from Holt's attorney. A single sentence: motion to reopen settlement has been withdrawn. Half an hour later, a second notification arrived. My bank account alerts. A wire transfer had hit for $8,000. The sender wasn't my mother. It was a corporate account from the real estate brokerage where she worked. Attached was a brief note: payment for the party bus and vendor debts as agreed. Contact will cease. I didn't call her. I didn't call Derek. I didn't even call Marin. I just went to the gate, punched in my code, and watched the heavy irons swing open. The mountain felt different, quieter, as if the air itself had finally stopped vibrating with the pressure of other people's greed. I took the $8,000, and I paid off the last of the legal fees I owed from the divorce. I cleared the debt for the cabin lease, paying the next 3 months in advance, and I walked to the edge of the property line where the old fire trail began. I stood there for a long time, the wind pulling at my hair, feeling the ground beneath my feet, solid, private, and entirely my own. I went back inside, poured the last of the coffee, and sat down at the table. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, and I wasn't waiting for a knock at the door. I was just there. For the first time in 15 years, the only thing I was responsible for was the next hour. I opened a book, leaned back into the silence, and finally, I breathed.